the occupation is time-consuming. Life under the occupation is uncertain. Life under the occupation is violent. Life under the occupation is a life without justice. And all of these things represent a violence that's visited upon people's everyday lives. And it's something that they can't escape, it's something that they can't move away from, it's something that they can't pretend isn't there, and it's necessary to understand that stuff, particularly if you're going to talk about things in the Middle East in terms of, like, peace and nonviolence. Okay? An example of how the life under the occupation is time-consuming, travel, distances. Throughout Israel, throughout 48, there's the area in the Israel's 48 borders. There's I told you you didn't have to know history. Sorry. Throughout this area, there's like modern highways. Israel looks an amazing amount like the United States. People go back and forth. It's not that large. People zip back and forth between Tel Aviv and Jerusalem in an afternoon. You know, they commute to work. It's not that large. It's not that hard to get around. Here in Israel, but in Palestine, roads aren't built for that kind of a traffic. They aren't built to maintain a modern economy or a modern state or anything like that. They are two-lane roads. They are treacherous. They are not well cared for because there isn't the money to care for it. A lot of those roads were built with aid money from USAID. And for example, like the trip from Ramallah to Nablus is a trip that is 30 miles. It's like the distance between like here and Iowa City, and it takes an hour to do it. A little more, give or take. The distance between Ramallah and Hebron is the distance between Iowa City and the Quad Cities. And it takes like 3.5 hours to do. And it's a crazy 3.5 hours. And you just have to do it. It's the only way you can get around. You just have to hit it. You're stopped constantly. When you go through checkpoints, you have to go through checkpoints when you travel. You have to go through checkpoints and you have to like show your papers, you have to wait in line. Palestinians who are workers who work actually in Israel but live in the West Bank have to line up early in the morning and wait in line, and it gets more crowded, and then the checkpoint may be closed arbitrarily for no reason at all. Maybe all of a sudden the line that you're standing in, so it's happened to me a number of times, the line that you're standing in just closes, and they're like, go to the other line. Why? You can't argue. There's no way to argue. There's nothing you can do by arguing. You just go to the other line. Maybe they're just spot in line. Whatever. Maybe they just close the checkpoint one day. Whatever. When you're there, you get through. You have to show your papers. Sometimes you have to argue with people. I found myself in kind of a weird situation when I first got into this. When I first got into the West Bank, I had no idea where I was, and I ended up in Calandia checkpoint in way early morning on a Sunday morning. And I was there, and I stumbled in, and when I say I had no idea where I was, I mean I had no idea where I was. I knew that I was on the planet Earth. And I stumbled into this checkpoint because I was just told, like, here. And so I stumbled into this checkpoint with all the Palestinian workers going to work, and here I am with my little backpack and my, dopey little multicolored scarf and, whatever, and I'm just, like, waiting in line. I don't really know what I'm doing there, like, what even this place is. I was in Calandia checkpoint north of Jerusalem. I didn't even know what direction I was heading. It should have clicked to me that if I was having to wait in line, I was getting ready to go back into Israel. But, you travel for 3 days, you get tired. So I'm there, and I finally wait, and I get through the checkpoint, and they look at my passport, and they're like, no, you can't go. And I'm like, what do you mean I can't go? And they're like, you don't have a visa. Because when I got into the airport, they gave me my visa, and I asked for it on a separate piece of paper because I didn't want an Israeli visa in my passport. And then in order to get my baggage claim, they took my piece of paper. And so when I showed up at that checkpoint, they were like, you can't get into Israel unless you have a visa. And I'm like, well, which is the way out of here? So, I mean, this is just a perfect example. There was another example of going through that same checkpoint. There was and this is kind of getting into the next topic, maybe I'll move on to that. And I'll say that life under the occupation is uncertain, like I said before. So we'll start with the checkpoint. Will the checkpoint that you have to go through be open? Will you be allowed to go through? In this same checkpoint of Calandia, I went through because we were heading through to get into Jerusalem. so we had to go into 48. And we got through, my comrades and I. But then the woman in back of us was there with her 2 daughters, and they were going to see their grandparents. And one child did not need a separate ID to get in, like separate papers, but the other child did. And there was a dispute between the Israeli guards at the checkpoint and the woman and her daughters about how old her daughter needed to be if she didn't have her own papers. Because at a certain age, they were arguing about whether it was like 4 or 7. And she's like, you know, my daughter's 6 or whatever age she was. She doesn't need papers. And the woman was like, no, she does, because she needs them at 4 or whatever, younger age than she was. And they sat there and like argued. But in the end, they said, no, you can't go through. You can't go through to see your family. Even though you say you've been here however many times, it doesn't matter, you can't go through. And then what do? You just have to go back, because you don't have any choice. Because you're in this structure that's like a zoo thing, it's like a cattle chute, and there is no getting through. You're just where you are, and you just have to stay. And that's the kind of violence. Not knowing if you're going to be able to just move around, to go see your family, to go to work, is a kind of violence. This uncertainty is a kind of violence. Life is also uncertain in the West Bank, and the violence of the occupation is also apparent in the way the olive harvest is handled. The olive harvest is one of the most that's going on now, where it's about to start up. Every fall, the olive trees they make their fruit, and they stay on the trees, and they can't be picked until the first rains. And they say that after the first rains, it sweetens the olive. And it took me a while to understand that olive was sweet, but because when you pick them off the tree and stick them in your mouth, don't do that, by the way. You can't just do that. After a while, you get used to kind of tasting it, but this used to be, the olive harvest used to be a time of immense joy and party, and imagine, just like any harvest, people are happy, they go into the field, and they work together in groups, they work as families. And it's a very, like, group-oriented thing. You stand under a tree, and you go like this, and you pull olives off the branches, and they fall down to a mat on the ground, and then you take them and you grab them up, and you pull out the twigs and the leaves, and then you get them and you put them in a sack, and you throw them on a donkey, or in a truck if you're lucky, and then you pack them out to the press. And you stop several times a day to have snacks and to have food and to bring the food into the field. And it's a fun time, and you talk and you laugh. And it's an important part of the culture to have those trees, to have that harvest. Because you think about harvests here where there's like corn, and it just like gets sown every year, planted. It gets planted in the ground every year, plant comes up, corn comes up, tassel comes off, corn comes out, plant is gone. It's not like that with olive trees. These olive trees are hundreds, thousands of years old. Old, inherited from father to son. Not to be sexist, but father to son. And that's the way it goes. People have these things, and they're important. They're like part of the family. And that's not an exaggeration. But whether or not the people will actually be able to get permission to harvest their fields, that can be a question. Whether or not their trees will actually be able to stand, that is the question. When I was there, I'll just bring up 2 little points. When I was there was one time when we were helping people in the village of Naveen, and the people in the village owned land between the Green Line and the apartheid wall and the separation wall. So in order to harvest those fields, you had to get permission to go through the gate. And you had to have papers. And instead of just being like, yeah, you own this land so you can go and bring your family. No, that wasn't an option. If you wanted your daughter to come, your daughter's name had to be on that permit. And if for some reason Soldier wanted to find a problem with your permit, Soldier found a problem with your permit. And you didn't get to go. And even if you got to go, maybe you only get to go for 2 days or a week, and you gotta harvest all your fields in that kind of time. We went over land. We went out. My comrades and I went to go help a family who was picking their olives in this space outside of Nylene, and we didn't have permission to go. And so we packed into a lorry or to a truck, and took off our confused, and we tried to look normal, and we went through the terminal checkpoint into 48, and we got dropped off at an overpass, and we had to go over land, staying away because you're on a hill and the settlement is up high, staying close to the ridge, so the people in the settlement can't look down and see you going through the land, because they'll call the soldiers. They'll call the soldiers. And we stayed and we harvested in that area. I mean, to have to do something like that, it's ridiculous. It's ridiculous. But the people don't have access to their land. I mean, that's just one example. Others of examples, other examples, well, I was harvesting once in an area, and even before the harvest began, the destruction of olive trees. Settlers will come out of the, I mean, you can imagine. Maybe you can't. I don't know if I can imagine. See, it's so ridiculous. People live in the settlements, and they come out of the settlements in the West Bank, and they come down the hill, and they wreak havoc on the olive groves. They chop down trees. They tear trees apart. They set trees on fire. They destroy trees. That's a pattern of violence. That's the violence the Palestinians live under. And it's, you know what? It's not just like, oh, I woke up and somebody shot my olive grove down. No, it's not like that. It's like, oh, we picked olives all day, and we're tired, and we're happy, and we're just about to leave. And as we're standing on the side of the hill, we look down the valley, and we look up the other side, and all of a sudden, and there's fire. And then a little bit farther down, and there's fire. And there's fires being set to these trees across the valley. And there's flashlights moving through. And you're scared because it's dark. And you don't know. Do they see you? Where do they come from? Are there more people? You just don't know. Do you say? Who do you report it to? What do you do? That's a kind of violence. Another example of how the occupation is uncertain is when it comes to building. In order to build, even when you own land in the West Bank, if you are in certain areas, if you're a Palestinian, you have to get permission to build. You can own a house. You can own land. Maybe nobody's even disputing that. But you can't just build. And it's not just build, you can't just dig a well. If you go, for example, and you build onto a house that you own, you're not even building a new structure, you're just building onto a house that you own, and you don't have permission to do it, then the soldiers can come down, knock the whole house down. Not just the addition, whole house gone. When that happened, not only did you lose your house, but it's not like you could just go get another or just buy another. It's not like that really. I mean, I don't think I have to explain to you what it must be like to have your whole house knocked down. If you go and you need permission to dig a well and you dig that well, you'll maybe get permission to dig the well 50 feet. Dig the well 50 feet. And the water is 60 feet underground. And so you dug all that way, and you still don't have water, and you can't go any farther. You can't go to the water, because you just can't. And if people come and they see it, if the soldiers come and they see it, they'll destroy it, they'll fill it in. So, life in the occupation is uncertain. And that's a kind of violence. But, frankly, life under the occupation is just plain violence. I mean, how can we even question it? On Tuesday, a 19-year-old was killed in Jenin camp when soldiers stormed his house in a midnight raid. He fled and they shot him in the head. Another man was killed in a camp in August by Israeli soldiers. And in Calandia last month, 3 people were shot and killed by the Israeli Defense Forces after the IDF raided the camp. And this is a refugee camp, the Calandia checkpoint where I talked about it. The IDF raided the camp looking for, like, terrorists, right? And they killed the people because the soldiers said that they needed to exercise self-defense. You know, they raided this place looking for people. People heard about it, and they got angry, and they started to come out of their houses. With what? There's like not guns in the West Bank. With what? With stones? And the IDF has full body armor, jeeps, and everything. And they felt that they needed to exercise self-defense by murdering 3 people. Yeah. But there's other kinds of violence that doesn't necessarily result in somebody getting shot in the head. There's little killings, little tiny kinds of killings. There's the settler violence, which I already spoke about. I directly experienced settler violence when I was in Hebron. There's a street in Hebron. Hebron's an interesting place. Understatement of the century. Right, so Hebron, interesting place. No, Hebron is a divided city. There's a Palestinian part and there's an Israeli part, a Jewish part. And so you don't just have checkpoints that are like on the outside of cities, or like you have to get through when you go into Nablus, or terminal checkpoints like you have to get through when you go through Calandia, when you have to go from the West Bank to Jerusalem. There's actually like checkpoints that are in the center of the city, so you have to go through regularly every day to go about your everyday business. And there's one street called Shahada Street, and it's closed. But it's not like, okay, I should be clear. In Hebron, yeah, it's a divided city, but there's not like there's no Palestinians that live in the Jewish quarter. I mean, people live where they live. And so Palestinians who live in the Jewish quarter, and you have to go back and forth for work or for school or whatever, particularly subject to these checkpoint problems. There's a street called Shahada Street in Hebron that's closed to Palestinians. It used to be like the main market, the main center of the market, but Palestinians just can't go now, and they're allowed to be on that street. And one time I was coming back from the checkpoint lot, and I went down Shahada Street, and as I'm going down Shahada Street, you know, I'm sort of crossing somewhere between like being tough and like minding my own business, and I get close to a school that's letting out, and it's full of students, Israelis, settlers, and I realized one of them I could see it, and I'm like, oh, this could maybe be bad, but I'm not gonna take it. No, that's not gonna happen. So I just think, I'm just walking ahead. I'm just minding my own business. I'm not going to look anybody in the eye because that's confrontational. I just know where I need to go. I'm going to go there. And I walk there. You know how sometimes there's like movement out to the peripheral vision and your eye just goes to it? Well, this happened to me. And there was a movement. And my eye just went to it. And I met eyes with one of the students. And it was like, oh. And he spat at me. I mean, that's small. Like, did he hit me in the face? Did he hit me on the body? No, he didn't. But still, it's distressing. That sounds so lame. It's distressing. No, but I mean, yeah, that's not right. Then you look at that little thing, at that little fact that you're on a street that there's a whole bunch of people that can't go on. Because you're doing something that's like a badge of people who can't go on the street. You get spat at. And then you notice that the settlers who are in Hebron are walking around with guns tucked into their pants and their belts and machine seen semi-automatic rifles slung over their shoulders as carelessly as their shirt tails hang out of their pants. And suddenly it takes on a different kind of meaning. And I didn't experience the kinds of harassment that a lot of certainly nobody like chased me home and screamed at me, things like that. But still, it's a kind of violence. So that's settler violence. Settler violence also becomes deadly. There's arson, there's harassment, there's murder, there's death. I volunteered in the olive harvest in a town south of Annapolis called Lara, and we were there, and it was wonderful. We worked with this man. His name was Abu Ayman, and Abu Ayman's brother was killed. He wanted us to volunteer in his olive harvest because he had the one last part of his fields that needed to be brought in, and he didn't feel safe harvesting it because they were up high on the ridge, and then there was a bluff, and then the hill continued, and up on the hill, there wasn't just a settlement. Like, when you say settlement in the West Bank, you're talking about something that looks like a suburb, really. It's got paved streets and billiard bars and houses with Spanish tiled roofs and dahlia bushes growing in the yard between sets and things like that. That's what it looks like. No, this is an outpost, which is, if settlements are illegal, and they are, the outpost is even illegal under Israeli law. An outpost is like a plywood shack that's nailed together. It's like kind of an extension of the settlement. That's, the Israeli law is kind of like, yeah, they shouldn't do that. What? There's an outpost. What? Huh. Yeah, they shouldn't do that. And people who live in outposts are people who, don't mind living like way out in the middle of nowhere in a plywood shack. They are there for a reason. And so this spot that it needed to be harvested in the olive field, it just needed to be done, but you couldn't see up over the ridge to where this outpost was. And so you couldn't see if people were coming. And so he wanted there to be internationals there so that he could be able to get a little bit of protection, because we would be willing to stand in front of those settlers if they came into the field. And if the settlers knew that there were internationals there, perhaps they wouldn't do any violence as they came. These are the same settlers. Abu Ayman had really good reason to fear these people, because 8 years ago they had come down from the outpost into his father's house and had shot his older brother dead. And that's, the fear of something like that, I can just guess it's just not something you get over. Even while we were there in the fields in Hawaii with Abu Ayman, the settlers from the outpost, because there were a series of outposts up on the hill, started moving across the ridge. And we started getting calls from our comrades who were in other fields in the area. The settlers are on the move, they're moving along the ridge. And then we heard some fire, and no one was hurt, but settlers in another area had joined up with settlers from our outpost, and they were just kind of shooting off guns. They were just kind of like making a problem.